Part 2, Blood and Betrayal. A Hank Sledge mystery. Previously on The Flitchman Fortune. Private Detective Hank Sledge was hired by Victoria Flitchman to find her missing sister Abigail, heir to the Flitchman furniture empire. Following a lead to Pier 47, Hank discovered evidence of a struggle and a gold cufflink, belonging to someone with the initials RM, the same mysterious man from a photograph in Abigail's apartment. But before he could investigate further, Hank was knocked unconscious by an unknown assailant. The sun was painting the city in shades of gold and corruption when I finally made it back to my office. My head still felt like it had gone 10 rounds with Joe Louis, but at least the world had stopped spinning like a roulette wheel. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. The gold cufflink sat on my desk like a small, expensive accusation. RM, whoever he was, had been at that pier. The question was whether he'd left voluntarily or feet first. I started with the obvious. A call to Jimmy Torino, who knew every fence, bookie, and lowlife from the Bowery to Brooklyn. If there was dirty money changing hands in this city, Jimmy had his fingers in it. "Hank, baby, how's the private dick business?" Jimmy's voice crackled through the phone line like bacon in a hot pan. "Can the small talk, Jimmy? I need information. You know anyone with the initials RM? Probably has money, definitely has expensive taste." There was a pause, then Jimmy's voice dropped to a whisper. "You asking about Riccardo Moretti?" The name hit me like a shot of bad whiskey. Riccardo Moretti was mob royalty, the kind of guy who wore $1,000 suits and left $1,000 corpses in his wake. If Abigail Flitchman had gotten mixed up with him, she was playing in a league where the stakes were measured in blood. "What's Moretti's story?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I didn't want to know the answer. "Runs numbers for the Castellano family. Smart, smooth, and deadly as a cobra in a cocktail dress. Word is he's been branching out, looking for legitimate businesses to wash the family's money through. Like a furniture company, maybe. A furniture company with a pretty heiress who might be persuaded to look the other way for the right price, or the wrong kind of pressure. Where does Moretti hang his hat? He's got a place in Little Italy, but he does most of his business out of the Velvet Room on 42nd. Fancy joint, expensive booze, expensive dames. The kind of place where people pay premium prices to pretend they're not criminals." I thanked Jimmy and hung up. The Velvet Room would have to wait until evening places like that didn't really come alive, until the sun went down and the honest people went home. In the meantime, I had another lead to follow. That piece of torn silk from the pier was still in my pocket, and it deserved a closer look. I took it to Manny Goldstein, who ran a dry cleaning business that catered to the carriage trade. If anyone could tell me about expensive fabric, it was Manny. "This is good stuff," he said, examining the silk through a jeweler's loupe. "Real good stuff. Custom job, too. See this weave pattern. This came from Bloomfield's. Probably cost more than my car." Bloomfield's was where the rich dames bought their glad rags. It was also where they gossiped like fishwives about everyone else's business. A few well-placed questions might shake loose some useful information. The salesgirl at Bloomfield's looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, all perfect curls and painted smile. Her name tag read Melody, and she had the kind of enthusiasm that usually came with a commission. "Oh yes, I remember Miss Flitchman," she gushed when I showed her Abigail's picture. "Such a lovely customer, always knew exactly what she wanted." "When was the last time she was in?" Melody's perfectly penciled eyebrows furrowed in concentration. "About a week ago. She bought the most beautiful black cocktail dress. Said it was for a very special evening. She happened to mention what made it so special. Well, she did seem excited about something. Kept checking her compact mirror and touching up her lipstick. And she bought new perfume too, our most expensive French import. A woman only does that when she's trying to impress someone special." So Abigail had been dolling herself up for her mysterious meeting with RM. The question was whether she'd known she was walking into danger or if she'd thought she was walking into romance. I was about to leave when Melody grabbed my arm. "Oh, there was one other thing. When she was leaving, she bumped into that awful Thomas Flitchman, her brother. He was with some floozy looked like she'd been rode hard and put away wet, if you know what I mean. What did Thomas want? He seemed angry about something. I heard him say something about family business and not if I can help it. Miss Flitchman looked upset, but she just walked away. Thomas called after her, but she pretended not to hear. I thanked Melody and left, my mind churning. So Thomas had been keeping tabs on his sister, and he hadn't been happy about something. Maybe his poker alibi wasn't as solid as his father thought. The afternoon was wearing thin when I decided to pay Thomas Flitchman another visit. I found him at the Stork Club, working on what looked like his fifth martini of the day. The blonde hanging on his arm looked like she'd been carved from cheap soap and painted with cheaper makeup. Well, if it isn't the family's pet gumshoe, Thomas slurred as I approached his table. Come to arrest me for having a good time. Just wanted to chat about your sister. When did you see her last? Thomas's eyes narrowed, and for a moment the drunk act slipped. I told you, the night she disappeared. At dinner. Funny thing, though, I talked to someone who saw you arguing with Abigail at Bloomfield's about a week ago. Something about family business. The blonde looked confused, but Thomas's face went pale under his tan. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. What family business were you so upset about, Tommy? Thomas stood up abruptly, swaying slightly. This conversation is over, Flatfoot. Come on, Candy. We're leaving. As they headed for the door, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Thomas was wearing gold cufflinks with his initials engraved in fancy script, just like the one I'd found at the pier. Just like the one that belonged to RM, except Thomas Flitchman's initials were TF, not RM unless he had a middle name, or unless he was using someone else's identity. I followed them outside and watched as Thomas helped the blonde into a taxi. As the cab pulled away, I saw something that confirmed my worst suspicions. Through the rear window, I caught a glimpse of Thomas's cufflinks catching the streetlight. One of them was missing. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the picture they were forming was uglier than a politician's promise. Thomas Flitchman was somehow connected to Riccardo Moretti. Maybe he was working with the mobster. Maybe he was being used by him. Either way, his sister had gotten caught in the middle. I needed to get to the Velvet Room and find Moretti before whoever was pulling the strings decided to tie them off permanently. The Velvet Room was everything Jimmy had promised: expensive, exclusive, and crawling, with the kind of people who made their money in ways that didn't appear on tax returns. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and thicker with corruption. I bellied up to the bar and ordered bourbon. The bartender looked like he bench-pressed small cars for fun, and he moved with the kind of economy that spoke of professional violence. I'm looking for Riccardo Moretti, I said, sliding a 20 across the mahogany. The bartender made the 20 disappear like a magician. Mr. Moretti's having a private meeting. Back booth, but you didn't hear it from me. I nodded and made my way through the crowd. The back booth was shrouded in shadows, but I could make out two figures hunched over what looked like business papers. One was a tall, dark-haired man in an expensive suit, obviously Moretti. The other was harder to see, but something about his posture was familiar. I was trying to get a better look when a hand fell on my shoulder like a lead weight. You lost, pal. I turned around to find myself face to face with the biggest man I'd ever seen outside of a circus. He had arms like tree trunks and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite with a rusty chisel. Just looking for the men's room, I said, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. It's that way, the giant said, pointing toward the front of the club. And keep looking that way. I started to move in the direction he'd indicated, but not before I got a clear look at Moretti's companion. It was Arthur Flitchman, and he was handing over what looked like business documents with hands that shook like autumn leaves. So the head of the Flitchman family was in bed with the mob. But where did that leave Abigail? Was she part of the deal, or was she the price her father had to pay for getting in over his head? I made my way to the front of the club, my mind racing. Everything I thought I knew about the case was turning inside out. Arthur Flitchman wasn't the grieving father, he was a businessman making deals with devils. Thomas wasn't just the black sheep son, he was connected to this somehow, possibly as a go-between. And Abigail. Abigail was either dead or being held as insurance to make sure her father kept his end of whatever bargain he'd struck. I was almost to the door when the lights went out. In the darkness that followed, all hell broke loose. I heard shouts, the sound of breaking glass, and what sounded like gunshots from the back of the club. People were screaming, running for the exits, and in the confusion, I lost track of everything except staying alive. When the emergency lights finally came on, the back booth was empty. Arthur Flitchman and Ricardo Moretti had vanished like smoke in a hurricane. But they'd left something behind: blood on the table and papers scattered across the floor. I grabbed one of the papers before the cops could arrive. It was a contract, transferring ownership of several Flitchman warehouses to a company called Mediterranean Imports. The signature at the bottom was Arthur Flitchman's, but it looked like it had been signed under duress. The cops were starting to push through the crowd, and I decided it was time to make my exit. Whatever had happened in that back booth, I had a feeling it was connected to Abigail's disappearance. And if Arthur Flitchman was dealing with people like Moretti, his daughter was in more danger than anyone realized. I made it to the street just as the squad cars started arriving. The night air felt clean after the smoky atmosphere of the club, but I knew the feeling wouldn't last. I was getting close to something big, something that involved murder, money, and a missing heiress. And somewhere in the darkness, the clock was ticking down to a deadline I didn't want to think about. End of Part 2. The plot thickens. Arthur Flitchman is dealing with the mob, Thomas has connections to Ricardo Moretti, and blood has been spilled at the Velvet Room. But where is Abigail, and who can Hank trust? Part 3 is coming soon, and you won't want to miss it. Don't forget to like this story, subscribe for updates, and hit that notification bell. What do you think Arthur Flitchman's deal with the mob involves? Share your theories in the comments below.